Here you get the same notion. In other words, some workers work even when their bosses aren't there. Some workers will only work when they're being watched. Here, notice, the servants should have been taking care of this dog, and they weren't. Total downfall of all things that are related to taking care of the property. With that, Eumaeus entered the well-constructed palace, strode through the halls, and joined the proud suitors. But the dark shadow of death closed down on Argos's eyes the instant he saw Odysseus, 20 years away. Line 360. Now, of course, for the dog lovers in the house, I've had students that read this and they actually were moved to tears. Can you imagine it? It's a reminder that while Odysseus for 20 years was coming home, other beings were waiting for Odysseus. Penelope, Telemachus, and Odysseus' favorite dog, Argos, all waiting. And at the moment when the recognition happens, Argos dies. Which obviously leads to the question, did he have one final happy moment before he died and went to doggy heaven? Of course, let's not miss this. Can you imagine the rage that is now welling up for Odysseus as he gets ready to get, to step inside of his hall? We'll see him next. Telemachus will nod to Eumaeus and invite him over. We'll see then Odysseus. Odysseus, line 370, into his old house, looking for all the world like an old and broken beggar, hunched on a stick, his body wrapped in shameful rags. Just in the doorway, just at the ashwood threshold, there he settled down, leaning against the cypress post. I told you about, we were going to see this post in a second. Post, a master joiner, planed smooth and hung with a plumb line years ago. There he is. You can see the picture of him, standing against the door, looking across the hall he ruled for all those years before he left for Troy. And all these drunken suitors are all there. Telemachus will immediately show him Xenia. Eumaeus will offer Odysseus some cuisine. Odysseus will thank him. Taking the food at line 390, he sits down, spreads out his filthy sack before his feet. The beggar falls to his meal as the singer raised a song throughout the house. Notice, a poet sings as Odysseus eats. I mean, it's a brilliant touch, isn't it? And then, once he had supped and the stirring bard had closed, the suitors broke into their uproar down along the hall. But we're told now Athena came to the side of Laertes' royal son. It's brilliant, by the way. I've always pointed out that it's Laertes' royal son. The idea is that Odysseus, as a beggar, is about to be treated really badly. His father and his father's father were all kings of this country, and now he's going to be treated the worst imaginable way. Go now, Athena says. Gather crests from the suitors, test them, so we can tell the innocent from the guilty. But the poet injects then a line, that at line 399, that says this, but not even so would Athena save one man from death. With the exception of Phineas, that poet, that Odysseus will say, they're all going to get jacked, right? They, however, will pity him, we're told, these suitors, and they'll ask, who is this? Where is he from? And, of course, that is the question of the Odyssey. And then Melanthius will be the one that says, I know exactly who this guy is, right? He's the one that came in with the swineherder, Eumaeus. And then Antinous. Now, anti means not, nous means mine, and so Antinous is the, even in his name, bad guy, right? The guy without a mind. He wheels and he says to the swineherd at line 411, why drag this to town? Haven't we got our share of vagabonds to deal with? Disgusting beggars who lick the feasters' plates. Isn't it quite enough, these swarming crowds consuming your master's bounty? Must you invite this rascal in the bargain? The ironies run deep. The ticks on Argos still are in our mind, as Antinous does not recognize he is a tick, right? Eumaeus will respond and give a good nice dress down to him, and then it will be Telemachus who will tell Eumaeus, stop. Don't waste so much breath on Antinous here. It's just his habit to bait a man who's abuse and spur the rest as well. And then Antinous will wheel at 395, will wheel on Telemachus and say, Telemachus will then speak to Antinous and say, how kind you are to me, Antinous. Kind as a father to his son. Homer loves this kind of irony. We saw this in the Iliad as well, didn't we? This idea of paying a compliment that's actually an insult. Encouraging me to send this stranger packing from my house with a harsh command. I'd never do it, God forbid. Take and give to the beggar. I don't grudge it. I don't even grudge you. I'd even urge you on, he says. No scruples now. Never fear your gifts will upset my mother or any servant in King Odysseus' royal house. But no such qualm could enter that head of yours, bent on feeding your own face, not feeding strangers. In other words, Telemachus says, everything for me is about xenia, showing proper guest-host relationship. I'm even showing it to you. I can't believe you don't show it. Antinous will come back. Oh, so high and mighty, Telemachus, such unbridled rage. If all the suitors gave him the sort of gift I'll give, the house would be rid of him for 3 whole months. With that, from under his table, he seized the stool that propped his smooth feet on as he reveled on, just lifting it into view. So in other words, he reaches down, he grabs his stool, he's going to throw it in a second. The other suitors will, in fact, give Odysseus food. Odysseus then will finally come to Antinous, and we have what you can imagine would be the, kind of major moment between the two rivals, right? Yeah, and the lines Odysseus is given here are quite remarkable at 460. Give me a morsel, friend, Odysseus the beggar will ask. You're hardly the worst a key in here, it seems. The noblest one, in fact. You look like a king to me. So you should give a bigger crust than the rest, and I will sing your praises all across the earth, identifying himself as potentially a poet. I, too, once lived in a lofty house that men admired, rolling in wealth. I'd often give to a vagabond like myself. We're familiar because Penelope has already told the story that, in fact, Odysseus did, in fact, show proper guest-host understandings. Then he goes into the long story that he gave to Eumaeus before in 14,300 and following, especially the bit about Egypt and all of that. But we're told at line 492, good God Almighty, Antinous cut the beggar short. Antinous is not a man who's interested in hearing stories. That says a lot. The poet Homer is wanting us to say, if you can't appreciate a good story, you have no mind. Antinous, right? What spirit brought this pest to plague our feast? Back off, he says, right? And then pity will be line 500. Odysseus will say, no sense in your head to match your handsome looks. Exactly what he said to Brotzia in book 8, line 205. Right? You'd grudge your servant a pinch of salt, he says. And with that boiling over, Antinous gives him a scathing look, and he lets fly. Now you won't get out of the hall unscarred, I swear, not after such a filthy string of insults. With that, we're told at line 508, he seized the stool, hurled it, square in the back. It struck Odysseus just under the right shoulder, but he stood up against it, steady as a rock. This idea of being a rock, we're going to get to the rolling stone in a second, but this idea of the rock, in other words, Odysseus is symbolized as strong. Notice, well, when Melanthius kicked him in the hip, he didn't move either. Should be a giveaway. The poet, of course, is giving us all of these all these reasons why the suitors should be able to figure out something's up with this guy. Unstaggered by Antinous' blow, he just shook his head silent, his mind churning with thoughts of bloody work. We're going to hear this as well with Telemachus in a second. He went to the doorsill and crouched and sitting down, his sack about to burst. There's double meaning, obviously, on that when he faced the suitors, saying, this is Odysseus now, speaking to all the suitors. Here in book 22, he'll be almost in the exact same spot, ready to jack all of them. And he says, hear me out, you lords who court the noble queen. I must say what the heart inside me urges. There's nothing to groan about, no hurt when a man takes a blow as he fights to save his own possessions, cattle, or shining flocks. But Antinous struck me all because of my good-for-nothing belly. That curse that makes such pain for us poor men. But if beggars have their gods and furies too, let Antinous meet his death before he meets his bride. It's interesting how when someone has been wounded in the Odyssey, they will call down a curse. We think of Polyphemus to his father Poseidon. Here it's Odysseus saying, he'll never get married to Penelope because I'm going to kill him first, or he'll be dead. Antinous will say, enough, enough. The suitors are outraged, right? They're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. They say it to him, right? It may be a crime to strike the luckless beggar, sounding very much like our biblical text, Hebrews 13:2, that notion of many have entertained angels unaware. Your fate is sealed if he's some god from the blue, and the gods do take on the look of strangers dropping in from abroad, disguised in every way as they roam and haunt the cities, watching over us all our foul play, all our fair play too. We'll get to this in our study of Dante and the Inferno, the idea that your actions are sooner or later going to come back. We know this as well in the karmic tradition of you don't get away with nothing, right? So they warned, we're told. But at line 540, Antinous paid no heed, and the anguish, we're told, welled up in Telemachus' breast for the blow his father took. Yet he let no tears go rolling down his face. He just shook his head, silent, his mind churning, back to line 514 for Odysseus, with thoughts of bloody work. Both Odysseus and Telemachus then have their motivations. Of course, the irony here is that the throne stool is going to be heard about by Penelope, and that's going to lead her to obviously ask the questions, right? And she will in fact say, may Apollo the archer, second mention of Apollo, strike you just as hard. And then Eurynomé, the housekeeper, will say, if only our prayers were granted, then not one of the lot would live to see dawn climb her throne tomorrow. And Penelope will come back and she'll say, Antinous is the worst of all of them. You'll remember that she had to tell him to stop in terms of trying to kill her boy Telemachus, right? Penelope then will call the swineherd at 563. Go, good Eumaeus, tell the stranger to come at once. I'd like to give him a warm welcome. Ask the man if he's heard some news about my gallant husband or seen him in the flesh. He seems like one who's roved around the world. And Eumaeus will respond, such stories he tells at line 570. He'd charm you to your depths. 3 nights, 3 days I kept him in my shelter. I was the first the fellow stumbled onto, fleeing from some ship. But not even so could he bring his tale of troubles to an end. You know how you can stare at a bard in wonder, trained by the gods to sing and hold men spellbound? How you can long to sit there listening all your life when the man begins to sing? So he charmed my heart. I tell you, huddling there beside me at my fire, he and Odysseus' father go way back, he says. Actually, Odysseus never actually said that, did he? But maybe in another part of their conversation. Sworn fins, and the stranger hails from Crete, where the stock of old King Minos still lives on, and from Crete he made his way racked by hardship, tumbling on like a rolling stone, until he turned up here. Now, I can't say that this is where Bob Dylan found his famous song, his 1965 hit, that some argue is the greatest single rock and roll song of all time. But I would challenge you to do a little bit of research on Bob Dylan and his song Like a Rolling Stone, and take a look at why he was writing that song and what the motivations for that song were. And it's remarkable how they connect with this, what we're talking about here, this notion of the disrespect that Odysseus has just endured from the suitors, and more will come. Penelope will say, go, bring him to me. We're told, why not, about these suitors. She says, their own stores, their bread and seasoned wine lie intact at home, food for their serving men alone, but they infest our palace day and night, they butcher our cattle, echoing what Telemachus has said. In other words, they are ticks, feasting themselves sick, right? So we're back to the ticks metaphor again. All of it squandered, and then she says it, there is no man like Odysseus in command to drive this curse from the house. Dear God, this is common prayer. If only Odysseus came back to native soil now, he and his son would avenge the outrage of these men like that. I think a lot of this is in book 22, when Odysseus kills every one of these defenseless men, and they are defenseless, right? There could be some pity, like, dude, you're killing all these guys, and none of them have any way to defend themselves. But it's all set up again by these kinds of events. At her last words, Telemachus shook with a lusty sneeze, we're told at line 604. Like a thunderclap resounding up and down the halls, the queen was seized with laughter. So now we've had laughter or smiling from Penelope, Telemachus, and Odysseus right in the Odyssey. Calling out to Eumaeus, wing his words, quickly go, bring me this stranger now face to face. You hear how my son sealed all I said with a seize. Now in our Fagel's translation, take a look at the footnote that's provided for us on page 513. The sneeze was a sign from the gods because you can't make yourself do it. Right? If I were to say to one of you, sneeze right now, I'll pay $1 million. Most of us can't do that, right? In other words, a sneeze is not something we don't control, and therefore it must be a message or a sign from the gods. Interesting, right? Eumaeus goes to Odysseus. He says she'll give you a shirt if you give her good information. Odysseus says, I'll tell her the whole truth and nothing but. The irony is, of course, at line 625. I know all about that man, Odysseus, right? It's been my lot to suffer what he suffered, but I fear the mob's abuse. In other words, let's wait. Why wait? Well, the poet obviously is creating tension. I think the other reason may be, scholars have pointed out, Odysseus might be worried that Penelope in full daylight would actually recognize him. And so he's going to ask for darkness and just sit by the fire and talk with her. And that way she can't recognize him so easily. And he says that, I want to sit next to the fire. Penelope comes back, and Eumaeus comes back to Penelope. Didn't you bring him? What's in the vagrant's mind? She has all these questions. Fear of someone? And Eumaeus will say, no, later tonight, talk in private. And Penelope will say this at 6:51. Nobody's fool, that stranger. Of course, it takes us back to book 9, line 410, and the idea that, of course, Odysseus called himself nobody, didn't he? The genius of this book is remarkable. He sees how things could go. Surely no man on earth can match that gang for reckless, deadly schemes. Well, Odysseus obviously can, right? Eumaeus will then go to Telemachus, warn him one more time, take care of yourself, and he says, I got to get home and take care of pigs. Telemachus will say, right you are, come back tomorrow. And then we will finish the book by the following lines. And the swineherd sat down again on his polished stool, and once he'd supped and drank to his heart's content, back he went to his pigs, leaving the royal precincts still filled with feasters, all indulging now in the joys of dance and song. The day was over, dusk was falling fast. Again, I call this book From Dogs to Dancing. Notice again that at line 181, we've got the suitors throwing their discus and spears, and by the end, they're singing and dancing. It is a brilliantly constructed book, which obviously sets us up for the books to come. Let's jump really quickly now to 2a. And the idea of messages. Well, obviously, one major message is coming home is bittersweet, right? Because things have changed when you leave. I've had students go away to college and come back, or they go on long trips for several years and then come back, and they have to admit that they know what this means to come back and everything's changed. It's hard also, another message, it's hard to lose the things we love, like Argos, for example, right? There's a final line that comes from a line from Plato that I think is a message which works here really well. Treat everyone with kindness. You never know what battle he or she is fighting. And I think that there's some real power to that idea, right? You never know what people are going through. Odysseus is this old beggar, and he deserves respect, and he doesn't get it. 2b, the symbolism, well, I mean, come on. Argos is a classic. I mean, it's one of the greatest in all of literature. Think about it. The aging, the loss, the forgotten, the motivation for revenge, it's all there, right? The irony, of course, is even in his name, Antinous is an individual who has no capacity to appreciate or to respect the stories that will be told, the stories that will be lived. The thrown stool, obviously, is a dark irony as well, right? He's got no idea that he has just sealed his fate. And, of course, nobody. The irony of that word being used for Penelope is quite fascinating as well. All of this is assuming, right? So many of our early books. At 3a, but also the Iliad. I mean, think about this. Book 17, right? If book 16 is the death of Patroclus, book 17 is the fight over Patroclus' body, and more particularly, the disrespect that Hector shows towards Patroclus, which will ultimately lead to his death. Think about that as it relates to the disrespect of the suitors towards Odysseus, right? What are the homecoming texts that you love? For example, the direct, they show up and everybody goes, whoa, you're back. We know about how Agamemnon got his homecoming. Or the ones that are kind of indirect, see, in secret. The way that Odysseus, for example, shows up. Or maybe shows up and there's nobody there. Do you know these films or these video games that you play where you show up and there's nobody there? I often will think about it. Almost any rendition of Robin Hood is usually played this way, right? Where Robin Hood will show up from the Crusades and, of course, his experiences in the Holy Lands, and he shows up and everybody's pretty much gone. There's nobody there. Think about at the very beginning of Grapes of Wrath, when young Joad shows up, and there's nobody there. The house is gone. And the feeling of like excitement, yeah, I'm back. Wait, where is everyone? It's compelling. Finally, of course, the reunion of Odysseus and Penelope and the tension, right, of what that will be like later. What other texts come to mind in that regards, where we know that a reunion is coming, but we haven't yet seen it and what it's going to be like, okay? At 3b, well, you know, the Argos story, right? Is there anything finer, I might ask you, right? It's short, but notice how powerful it is. What are your feelings about that story? How does that story move you? Are you a dog lover that you're moved by that? What's a time, how about this one? What's a time you forgot to show respect and it kind of makes you sad now that you realize that? That is to say, you didn't show proper respect maybe to someone. I've had students who, I remember that time we came back from a ball trip when I was a coach many years ago, and we walked into the gym and with my ball players, and they stood and they watched, and all the janitors were working. It was like 1 in the morning, and they were all sweeping up because of all of the mess of a ball game that had just happened in the gym. And they were like, kind of like, oh, so we get to come and watch the game and just make a mess, and then we leave, and then other people have to clean it up. Or, for example, in our lunchroom, the way some students will just throw stuff on the floor and not clean it up, and then even walk through it and track it, never considering the fact somebody's got to take care of all of that. When was the time you showed disrespect, and now you look back and you go, oh man, that was bad form. I was acting like a suitor. I was acting like a tick. That's gross. What was the time, how about this one? What was the time someone threw a stool at you? Right? Threw a stool at you. And you had to turn the other cheek. Oh yeah, remember that Matthew 5:38 line, right? You had to turn the other cheek. In other words, you had to put up with it. What was the time when you did that? Well, obviously Homer is building this tension. We won't see Odysseus and Penelope together until book 19 because we got to have book 18. We're going to go back to the walls of Troy. We're going to go back to the Iliad. We're going to go back to a fight to set up the fight. It's going to be fun stuff for us. I look forward to continuing our study. I'll see you with book 18 in a moment. Thank you.